One of the fastest portions of your fast-growing tech team just might be the data team. Today, we're going to be talking about how to do that well on Culture Builder Live. Hey, I am Chris Wink, the CEO and co-founder of Technically, your news organization that covers technical teams, growth, economies, and the people inside of them. I am here to talk a bit about data engineering, data science, data analysis, a whole mess of data team roles, how they're growing, how to build them well. And to do that, I'm joined by Nicholas Dela Fuente. He's with the Pragmatic Institute, the Data Incubator at the Pragmatic Institute, doing particular work on growing data teams. Nicholas, thank you for being here.
Of course, I'm happy to be here. I'm excited to talk about this stuff. It's exciting
I,
things, you know?
these
Exciting
are
things.
exciting things. This
Yeah.
is the real stuff. I believe that's right. So help me a little bit, and some of the audience will be bored by me, but I may more than I should use our terms around data engineering and data teams, data analysis, data science a bit more loosely than I ought to. So why don't you give me a little bit of grounding here? We're talking about data teams. What roles are we talking about? How do they interplay? And what is kind of your immediate focus at the Data Incubator, the Pragmatic Institute?
Yeah, of course. So right now, at least at Pragmatic, we're focused on data scientists, data engineers, and data analytics, which are pretty much the three pillars, I would say, of most data science teams. I'd say typically you have data scientists, you have data engineers, you maybe have some type of chief analytics officer or some type of chief data officer that is sort of relaying information between the various data teams and the data employees. And I guess really diving deep into these terms, we can sort of start to get some understanding about what they mean. And just from a general summary of what a data engineer is a data engineer is essentially somebody that deals with the architecture of data at your company. Somebody that knows how to move data around in an efficient, cost-effective manner, because it can be expensive, especially if you're dealing with large amounts of data that you don't really know how to work with, right? So data engineers are typically fundamental in a lot of ways in terms of getting data to the point in which it can be analyzed. And this is sort of where data scientists come in, or maybe data analyst or business analyst, in the sense that now that we have this data that has been aggregated and moved around by these data engineers, we now have these data analysts and data scientists to sort of build models or get different pieces of information from this now aggregated or cleaned up data. And I guess I've been saying business and data analyst. I actually don't know if I mentioned business
Yeah.
analyst, but business analysts and data analysts are they have relatively similar jobs in the sense that a business analyst or a business or data analyst will typically um, employ some type of interpretation of the various collections of data that have been provided by the data engineer. And they sort of guide business insights, they sort of make sort of statistical inferences about the data, and they sort of are the people who really drive the decisions behind a lot of the movements that the business are going to make in the future. Um, so I would say really those are sort of the three pillars of most data teams is data engineers, data analyst or business analyst, and machine, well, I mean, data scientist. But yes.
And I mean, one point that for our purposes on the Technically side reporting on this, IBM uses numbers 2.7, almost to 3 million or so people in data related roles. This gets a little bit squishy, obviously. Smaller firms, there are people who are doing data analysis type work that might not have that in their title. Nicholas, like when are you seeing, at what point are you seeing companies build out data teams? I imagine some companies are having at the startup level if they're heavily data oriented. If data is just more on the business intelligence side, how big is a company getting when they begin building out these teams?
Yeah, so it really depends, especially on what type of field you're in. I mean, I'd say there's probably three questions you should really ask yourself if you should even consider hiring some type of data team. And that is, what are you trying to accomplish with this data? Do you even have data in the first place? Are you trying to get business insights? Are you trying to build is your company based off of these models that are being developed by the data scientists? Is your company based off of the models that are being developed by the data engineers, the sort of data movement models with the pipelines? And like, who needs the data? Do we need these insights? Are they going to provide better sort of analytics for our marketers? Are they going to be at the forefront of the decisions we make at the business? So this is sort of fundamental to what are we trying to accomplish with this data. And I'd say this also goes along to sort of trying to figure out what kind of data do we have? Do we have data that is important? Do we have big or small data? Is it multifaceted, or is it single source? In the sense, is it coming from multiple streams, or is it coming from a single sort of source? Is it batch? I'm throwing out all of these terms, but
Right.
essentially trying to understand where your data is coming from and what you're trying to accomplish with it, with that data, as well as how complex it might be. And if you're a startup company, you might not have a lot of data, but you might at some point in the future have a lot of data. And that's what you sort of need to start understanding. Is a lot of companies nowadays, is startup or not, are moving in the direction of trying to do something with their data, because data is going to be a fundamental part of most businesses at some point down the line. So it is never going to be a bad idea to at least consider maybe moving forward with hiring a data team, because they do provide valuable insights to the marketers, to the product team, to the supply team, to the finance team, and just to the business in general.
I interviewed someone who once said if data is this generation's oil, some data's got to be the petroleum jelly, which means household, small, tiny use, not exactly transformative. That's what you're kind of getting at. Depending on your company size, do you have a little jar of petroleum jelly, or is this a foundational part of the business you're building? So let's assume that either I'm at scale and perhaps I'm reorienting my teams to have a clear data focus, or maybe I'm at a growth stage and gosh, now I have a couple BI folks, I have a couple people who are in these roles and I'm trying to amass something that looks more akin to a best in practice modern data team. Help me a little bit. What do I gotta know if I'm on the HR side? If I am on the team lead side, what should I be thinking about to build a great data team?
Yeah, of course. And I think that's a really good question. So, for instance, I would say, like, if the HR lady, let's say she's trying to hire a collection or the HR person is trying to hire a data team so that they can better understand the data they're dealing with. I think one of the fundamental questions is: are you looking for a data scientist, or are you looking for a data engineer, or are you looking for a data analyst? Because what is really important is, if you don't have your data in a collected, organized form, then hiring a data scientist isn't going to do nearly as much as hiring a data engineer would do, because you might have data, but it might not be in a situation or in a place that is easily accessible to get insights from it. So, let's say that you have a bunch of data and you haven't done anything with your data team. I would say probably one of the fundamental things, one of the first things you should do, is hire a data engineer, because these data engineers are going to implement, test, and maintain sort of the infrastructural components that sort of are sort of fundamental to the actual data team itself. And it's interesting because data science, as I'm sure a lot of people are aware of, has been a very quickly growing field over the course of the last 4 or 5 years. And data engineering has been growing in the background, but it hasn't gotten nearly as much publicity as data science, which I've always thought has been super interesting, because data scientists sort of need data engineers in the first place
Mm,
to really start using the data. And I'm honestly surprised that data engineering wasn't the one to sort of get the most publicity, or the one to take off the quickest, because it is fundamental to at least beginning the usage of the vast amounts of data that you might have.
Nicholas, can I? Sorry, small divergence there, just to pick up on that. We at Technically have done some reporting for years about how much every job title is marketing, and data science has a strong brand. That word science has an allure to it. And engineering, but almost literal definition of what an engineer is infrastructure oriented. Again, in software, it's kind of grown. Um, but did you just say something important? And is that do the roles have a branding problem that data science seems more alluring? So a company wants to have a data science first, even if that's illogical because you need the engineer first, or does that sound far too shallow?
No, I think that's a very, very true a point that I was making, and that you brought up again, is that it's interesting because a lot of these companies, and I've seen it happen over and over again, just being in the field, is that we will somebody will hire a data scientist, or we will hire a data scientist, and we expect them to perform data engineering tasks, such as being
Mm,
able to understand the different types of data storages, or understanding like understanding whether or not to use a relation or a non-relational database. Like data science have the ability to understand that, but a data engineer is somebody who fully understands how to move this data around, how to build the data architecture, how to get it set up to a point in which the data scientist can start using it, or how your company in general can start using it. So yes, I would say that it is a branding issue. And I find that a lot of people who are actually looking for data scientists, at least companies that are actually looking for data scientists, are really in disguise looking for a data engineer.
mm,
Um, that's really interesting because I don't feel like it's come up enough. Like the need of a data engineer, probably over the need of a data scientist. And you see it in the field nowadays that a bunch of these data scientists are getting hired, but they have to learn all of these new skills that aren't necessarily what a data scientist should be doing. It's ultimately a data engineering job that they got hired for, with a little bit of data science on the side.
mm.
I don't know if you've heard the term that, oh, data science is a lot of data cleaning. It takes up like 80-90% of the job. And it's even more so when you don't have a data engineer. So it's like it can be a bit frustrating for a company and for somebody getting hired as a data scientist to not fully understand what they might be getting themselves into.
Hmm.
And or to be I'm sorry, what were you about to say?
Well, it's my way. I was just tossing in another metaphor. I once heard someone say that data as air. It's so ubiquitous. There's high quality. There's low quality. It needs cleanliness or not. You're kind of getting at you might be hiring someone who at a data science level. You need to make sure you have the clean air and want to learn about we gotta what we can learn from that, as opposed to making it clean in the first place. There's a lot of work to do. There's infrastructure work to be done. There's engineering to be done. Is your point? Uh,
Exactly, yeah. um,
so go ahead. Yeah, because I did derail you there a bit. You were smartly and savvily building us on building a great data team, and I derailed you on the data engineering point.
Yes, so let me go back to what I was originally saying. I believe I was talking about how data engineers are sort of fundamental to,
And I was
yes,
agreeing with you and said,
yes,
"What?
yes,
How an
yes.
interesting concept." Yes,
Well, the other interesting thing too, as well, I guess this is sort of also derailing, but it's a good derail. It's not one
love a
that
derail.
should
That's
be,
not a lethal
fun.
derail.
Yeah,
We're
not at
going a
all.
happy place. Yeah.
Exactly. So, yes, is another interesting point is actually that data scientists sometimes companies aren't looking for data scientists either. I mean, they're not even might not even be looking for a data engineer, but maybe they're looking for a business analyst or a
Right.
data analyst. And this is sort of where a lot of these terms start to break down. Is like, okay, well, what's the difference between a data analyst and a data scientist, and what's the difference between a data analyst and a data engineer? And honestly, I think, for example, a really good core team is built of all three, including maybe some type of chief analytics officer slash chief data officer role, so that they can sort of relay information between data engineers and data scientists. Actually, this is really interesting. This is also sort of a derail, and if I
Hmm.
get too off point,
I'm
please
enjoying it.
reel me back in. But it's interesting because there's always this sort of weird thing that goes on between data science and data engineering teams. And this is why I think it's really essential to have a chief analytics officer, or some type of chief data officer, or some type of CTO, or somebody at least directing the communication between these two fields, is because data engineers really like to take time to build the systems, and data scientists really want to take time to run the models.
Hmm.
And one of them requires the other to actually um, get moving. And that is the data engineers actually need to finish the architecture before the data scientists can actually start using the data. So there's this interesting conflicts that takes place amongst teams, where the data scientists want the data engineers to not make it perfect, and they don't want it to be like at the absolute, um, like it doesn't need to be an architectural masterpiece. And this is sort of where the chief analytics officer can come in, and sort of with the knowledge of the field, bridge the gap between data science, data engineering, and maybe some additional domain expertise, sort of acting as both the visionary and maybe the technical lead, and directing both the data scientists and data engineering in the correct direction. Because there is a period of time when the systems of data are being put in place that the data engineers and data scientists are sort of at odds with each other in a weird sort of not direct way. But
Hmm.
yeah. And then I guess that's the sort of important aspect of why it's sort of nice to have oversight over both the data scientist and data engineering team. But another sort of an important field that is not sort of discussed a lot is the importance of having a business analyst and a data analyst, because the data scientist understands the models and they understand sort of how to get inferences from the data and or get insights from the data and develop these really complex models to sort of build systems. And data engineers create the data so that, or not create the data, but they aggregate and store the data um, in nice architecturally designed locations. But what a business analyst is going to do and what they're going to bring to the team, business and data analyst, again, I'm using the terms relatively synonymously. There's a small nuance that we can get into in a moment. But essentially, what a business analyst and a data analyst is going to do is it's going to bring in the business knowledge. It's going to bring in the marketing knowledge, or maybe the sales knowledge, um, or the supply knowledge, or they have some other field that they've sort of mingled with, and they're able to get the insights that have been generated from the data scientist and use them in a business sense. They are sort of the communicators. They are the sort of people that interact with both the marketing team and the data scientist, because they have a good understanding of both fields. So that's the thing. It's like all of this stuff is so interconnected, and it needs parts. And as you said before, data is big, right? And it's air.
Right,
But
right.
yeah.
Nicholas, I regret to acknowledge that we're actually coming up on time here. I maybe last just touch on for me. We do a lot of reporting on the considerable difficulties with the hiring landscape, period, right now, and in tech and tech adjacent roles, that's even more nuanced. A lot of what you described might show up on the software build side of any organization. I wonder, leave us, is there any nuance that you're really hitting that is distinct about building the data team, or can I take my logic and say I've built out software development teams? This sounds very similar, just new titles. Is that fair, or is there a nuance that we're missing?
Well, I think there is a large difference, and mostly because it is a different field. And I think the focus on understanding what you need is a bit more important in the data field, because, like I was saying beforehand, and again, I guess this goes for software as well, but software is sort of dealing, not always, but with similar tools. I guess it depends on what I mean, maybe a front end engineer is not going to be able to do some back end tools and vice versa, but it's the same sort of complexities, in the sense that you should know that a data scientist is really good at analyzing data and should be a bit more math and statistics based. Maybe have some communication skills and be able to understand models at a fundamental level. You should be able to understand that data engineers should be a bit more software or coding, or have some type of advanced programming skills and understand data architecture. So there are nuances to who you should hire, and I guess as any as for building any team, you should understand which roles you need for which task and which
Okay.
task you need to employ at the company.
Love it. Nicholas, I appreciate it. That is a look here at building data teams. The Pragmatic Institute, including its program, the Data Incubator. We'll make sure we drop links underneath the vid and in our follow-up story. Nicholas, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have you on here. As always, this was this week's Culture Builder Live. Check out Technically for additional insight and wisdom on labor workforce trends inside tech economies. I'm Chris Wink. I'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.